Welcome to Chapter 2 of this Introduction to Spring Boot. It's time to get started. We're going to install Spring Boot, start our first project, and we'll get it mounted into Eclipse. Well, the first port of call would be the homepage for the Spring Boot project, which we'll find at the URL you can see here. It's the usual Spring project page, and we have over here a set of links to the reference manuals. As always on a Virtual Pair Programmers course, we won't be afraid to check out these reference manuals, so you'll probably want to open a link to the current version of Spring Boot. At the time of my recording, it was version 1.3.3, and it may well be a later version by the time you watch these videos. So keep that reference manual open in your browser, but where do we start with a Spring Boot project? You're going to find that it's really quite different to a regular Spring project. Normally, of course, we would be going into our IDE, we would be setting up a Maven POM or an Ant script, we'd be setting up dependencies, and we'd probably be working for a long time before we actually got going. But as I said in the introduction, one of the reasons for Spring Boot's existence is it's going to very quickly allow us to bootstrap a complete Spring project with all of the scaffolding in place, and we just have to slot in our code. There are several ways of booting a Spring Boot project, and I'll invite you to check out the reference manual for the full list of ways that you can do it, but I'm going to show you two ways. I think a very common way of starting a Spring Boot project, as described here in the Quick Start section, is to install the Spring Boot CLI. And at the time of recording, that link goes into the reference manual rather than a download link. The CLI is a command line interface, and it ships with a set of commands to enable us to work with Spring Boot. The CLI can be downloaded from the link you can see here, and it's really the usual process of unpacking that folder and then adding the bin directory in there to your path environment variable. And then you can use a command to start a brand new Spring Boot project. Now, at first I thought, well, this is the way, this kind of feels like the right way to work, but I've discovered that I think probably until you start doing some more advanced operations with Spring Boot, this CLI doesn't really give you a lot of power. They claim here that this is definitely the quickest way to get a Spring application off the ground. I'm not sure about that, because you've got to do the work of installing, okay, just adding a path environment variable, but there is a bit of work to do. I think there's a much quicker way, and that is to go to the URL you can see here, which is start.spring.io. And what you're seeing here is a web page which can do exactly what the CLI can do. Now, when I first came across this, I thought, oh, this is a horrible way of starting a project. It doesn't really feel right to go to a web page to start a Spring project. But it turns out that the CLI calls this start.spring.io under the covers anyway. So we're certainly not losing anything by using this web application, and it is really fast to start a new Spring project. So let me take you through it. We've only got a few options here. Do you want to generate a Maven project or a Gradle project? As I explained in the introductory chapter, for the recordings, I'm going to go with Maven because I think that's probably the most commonly used. It seems to be the kind of default with Spring Boot. Personally, when using Spring Boot in real life, I go for Gradle because I love Gradle. So you can certainly choose the build tool that you're more familiar with. For the videos, I'm going for Maven. You'll probably want to choose the latest version from the list of versions here. There are some 1.4s showing up here, but they're currently in development, so 1.3.3 is good for me. For project metadata, this is your regular Maven group and artifacts. So for me, the group is going to be com.virtualpairprogrammers. And the artifact, as described in the opening chapter, we're building a fleet management system, so this will be Fleetman. And now for the interesting bit. Over on the right hand side we have the option to search for dependencies. Probably the main selling point of Spring Boot is that we can tell Spring Boot what kinds of, if you like, facets we're going to have on our application. We know from the introduction that we're going to be building a Spring MVC project, and we're going to be using Spring Security. We're also going to be using JPA on this project. And the way that Spring adds these features to our projects is via these things called Spring Boot starters. All we have to do, if, for example, we want a Spring MVC application, is to search for the dependency called web. And we're getting a helper here giving us a list of matches. And the first option here is, do we want to build a full stack web application using Tomcat and Spring MVC? We definitely do. So if we select that option, we can now see that this has been added to the list of selected dependencies. We also want to use Spring Security, so we could search for security. I hope you're following along with me, but for now, for reasons that will become obvious when we get to the chapter on security, don't add the dependency on security in just yet. We just want the dependency for web. Now, there are some further options that we can get to via this link here to switch to the full version. And you can see, for example, there's a description field here that would be worth changing. And if you're using an earlier version of Java, such as Java 1.7, then I recommend you change this option here for Java version. I'm a Java version 1.8 or Java 8, so it will be fine to go with the default. You might be surprised to see that I'm choosing the packaging of jar. Even though we'll be building a web application, you're going to see that we can build that as a jar file. The useful thing about this advanced set of options is if I go further down, what we're getting here is a complete list of all of those starters. And it is an absolutely amazing collection of features that we can choose from here. We already have the web option ticked, but you could go through these options now like a menu. Let's say that you're planning to use Spring AOP in your project. Well, a simple tick there will ensure that you're going to have all of the jar files you need for AOP development, plus any default configuration that the Spring Boot team have determined is the most common set of defaults for that particular type of project. And if you feel like it, I invite you to have a look at this amazing list of pre-configured project facets. We are going to be adding quite a few of these later on through the course, but for now, as I say, we just want the web option ticked. So that's quite an easy process, and we can switch back now to the simple version. And all you have to do is click the Generate Project button, and you will get a very quick download. It's a very small zip file. I think it's of the order of about 50K at the moment, representing your entire application. Now, as I said in the introduction, of course, you need to be online to do this. Don't think that you could use the Spring Boot CLI if you're offline. You can't, because the CLI just does exactly this process of calling this URL to generate this zip file. So I have a folder here which is eventually going to be my Eclipse workspace. And all you need to do is unpack the contents of the zip into this workspace folder. So let's have a little peek inside there, and you should immediately recognize this as a Maven style project. We have a pom.xml in there, and we have a source folder with the usual Maven structure. And we'll have a look at the contents of that in a short while. But also, quite usefully, what they've supplied here is a Unix style shell script called mvnw, but also a Windows command shell called mvnw.cnd. Now, what we're seeing here is a wrapper for Maven. And this means that even if you don't have Maven installed on your system, you can run the appropriate command. And actually what it's doing, if you look inside the .mvn folder, it's actually a hidden folder, but if you unhide that folder, inside there's a wrapper, and this maven wrapper.jar is effectively a sort of embedded version of Maven. So this is a really fast way of getting up and running. I don't even have to fiddle about installing Maven. I have to warn you that this doesn't always work. For example, if you're running on Cygwin on Windows, then I have failed to get these wrappers working. In that case, there's no problem. You would just use a regular Maven installation. So you would run your regular MVN against this POM script. So by the end of this chapter, we will be running this project as a regular Eclipse project. But for now, I'd like to see if this Maven script actually works. So pop up a terminal window or command prompt in Windows, navigate into your new Fleetman folder, and from here we can run the Maven wrapper. On Macintosh or Linux or Unix, I think you're going to need a // before nvnw, but we won't need that on Windows. And the Maven goal that we're going to go for is the package goal, which is going to build a full jar file for this project. And as usual with Maven, this is now going to go away and download the entire internet. The Maven wrapper is going to have to acquire plugins for Maven, and it's going to need to download all of the jar files needed for this Spring MVC project. So if you felt like it, you could pick your way through this download log. You'll find Tomcat in there, all of the Spring jar files that you'll be familiar with, and all the rest of it. But of course, this is all going to be automatic. Okay, well, that took quite a few minutes for me because I am working on a clean computer here, and this is the first time I've used Maven on the computer, so there were a lot of jar files to download for the first time. But of course, now when I run future builds, it won't need to download again. So I'm going to run that Maven goal again, just so we can see now more clearly what's going on in the log. And I don't know if you saw then, in fact, I'll make sure in post-production we do a freeze here. You can see that some tests are flashing past. So already we can see that built into Spring Boot are a set of tests. And actually what it's doing to run those tests, they're more than unit tests, they're full integration tests. It's running an embedded Tomcat so that it can run integration tests, which is quite interesting. But you should be seeing that once the tests have run, there's only one test to run, but after that, it should be building for you a jar file. As usual in Maven, that will be in the new target directory that's been created. And we have here a jar file named after our project. Just in case you're interested, of course, this is going to contain a lot of downloaded jars. It is, for me, around 13 megabytes, which sounds quite reasonable for a full stack Tomcat application. Now, one of the great things about working in Spring Boot is we can now run this as a full web application without having to fiddle around with Tomcat, because embedded in that jar file is a full installation of Tomcat. We can run this jar file as a regular executable jar. So I hope you're familiar with doing that. You will have Java installed. So java-jar followed by our Fleetman jar file. That will take a few seconds to run. For me, it was around 4.5 seconds. I'll just go up through the logging. We can see a friendly welcome to Spring Boot. There's some regular Spring logging following. As usual, you're looking for no exceptions and you want to see that the application is running. Now for the moment of truth. You should be able to go to your browser and visit just localhost :8080. We don't need anything other than that. And if you're seeing this white label error page, then okay, it doesn't look very pretty, but I can promise you that what you have here now is a full stack Spring MVC application hosted on Tomcat. I'll be showing you in the next chapter how to add some proper web pages to this application. In the meantime, to close this chapter, I'm now going to show you how we can continue this development in Eclipse. Of course, there will be no problem now in you continuing to develop using the command line, but I know that many of you will prefer to be working in a development environment, So I'm going to complete this chapter by switching our development across to Eclipse. Be sure before you do this to kill the process that you started on the command line. So a Control-C, otherwise you're going to be locking up port 8080. Now remember that we have a folder called Fleetman, which is containing our projects. And I said that the folder above that is going to be your workspace. So fire up Eclipse as usual and set the workspace to the folder that we just saw. And we'll import that new project. So my usual way, file, new Java project, and then the project name will be Fleetman, exactly matching the folder that we created on the workspace. Now Eclipse will automatically configure itself based on what it finds in that folder, which, as you know, is a Maven style structure. Now you'll certainly be seeing some errors because we haven't yet configured the build path, but what you should be seeing, if I go to the build path and configure build path, you should be seeing that automatically Eclipse has picked up the src main Java and src test Java folders, and it's added them to the source path. If that's not the case, then you might want to add them now. And before we get this compiling, I'd like to have a little look around and see what's inside the main Java branch. Well, we have a package which matches the group ID that we started with, and in there just one Java class called, and it will be whatever your project was called, followed by application. And what you're seeing here is the entire code for the application as it stands at the moment. As you can see, there's a main method in there, and that's the reason that we were able to run this as a regular executable jar without worrying about building it into a war and deploying it. And this line here, spring application.run, is going to automatically bootstrap the Spring container and start it up. Now the focus of this class really is the single annotation here on line 6 at Spring Boot application. Now, by the way, this is a new-ish annotation. It was added, I think, back in something like Spring Boot 1.1 or 1.2. It certainly wasn't there from the start. But the Spring Boot application annotation is really just a combination of 3 annotations. You don't need to follow along here. I'm just typing this in for illustration. I'll be deleting it almost immediately. The Spring Boot application automatically gives you 3 annotations for free. And the first one is at configuration, which you will be familiar with from Java config. It means that this class qualifies as a Java config file. So if we were to add in to this class some @bean definitions, then they would be automatically picked up. I have to say though that you don't usually put your own bean definitions in here because we can very easily create our own configuration classes. In fact, often you're never going to need to change the code inside here, but it's there anyway. What we're also getting for free is an annotation that you will be familiar with, and that is the @component scan. And that means that if we now go ahead and add in any @controllers or @services or @repositories, they will be automatically picked up. Be aware though that this component scan is going to run relative to the base package of the class that this is in. So if you were to add in a controller and you put it up in a package higher than com.virtualpairprogrammers, then it won't be found. So I think you probably need to be aware of that, but it's not usually a problem because usually this will be your base package. And finally, there's a Spring Boot specific annotation, which is @enable auto configuration. And this really is the annotation that is doing all of the hard work. It's a very clever system in Spring Boot where Spring Boot will inspect the class path, and based on what it finds on the class path, it will perform auto configuration. So in our case, you know that we have specified that this is going to be a full stack web project. So the @enable auto configuration is going to find on our class path a jar file for Spring MVC. That will inform Spring Boot, oh, okay, I need to set up all of the common defaults for Spring MVC, and it will do that at startup automatically without any further work. And the defaults that have been set up, well, they're just good defaults that the Spring Boot team think we're probably going to want. And the same will apply when we go ahead later in the course and we add Spring Security into the project. This annotation will find the Spring Security jar files and will automatically set up a basic configuration of Spring Security. It will secure all of the URLs and set up HTTP basic authentication, all kinds of things. So you do not need these 3 annotations because we're getting them for free from the @Spring Boot application. Well, I'm talking a lot here, really, just to give you a feel for what's happening under the hood with these annotations, but quite frankly, this is almost like magic, and you can almost forget it's even there. I hope as we go further through these videos on Spring Boot that you will get a better and better feel for the structure of Spring. But for now, to close this section off, I would just like to get to the point where my Eclipse project is compiling. To do that, well, you probably know how to do that already from your Maven or Gradle experience. We need to run the Eclipse plugin for Maven so that we can automatically construct a build path. So if you're using Maven like me, I'm going to stop using the command line now. I'm going to run this pom.xml using the standard Maven plugin. For the Maven goal, it's going to be Eclipse : Eclipse, exactly as we did in our Java Build Tools course. Again, there will be a lot of downloads because this is the first time I've run this plugin. This won't happen in future. And we're looking for a build success. To make the changes be picked up, we'll need to right-click on the project and refresh. Now you should see a slight change to the project structure because the main resources folder has now been added. And if all is going well for you, you should now see that all of your code is compiling. We've got no red squiggles anywhere. I'd just like to have a look on the build path, configure build path, just to show you exactly what's happened there. The big changes on the libraries tab, it's now added all of the jar files that we need for this project. So the regular Spring MVC, Spring Core, Spring Beans, Spring AOP jar files that you're familiar with. Of course, there's some Spring Boot files, and there's the usual kinds of dependencies such as AOP Alliance. There's the Tomcat embedded jar files and so on. So that was all done automatically. And now finally, to close this chapter, we should be able to run this trivially as a regular Java application. So you'll be seeing in the console roughly what you saw on the command prompt, a little bit of Spring Boot logging, and then a message that the application has started. And going back to the browser, we should be finding that that URL is responsive. Now, a little bit later on, I'm going to show you how we can auto start the entire project every time we make a change. But until then, I just want to remind you that every time we make a change, we will need to remember to terminate before rerunning again. Otherwise, we'll have a port lock. I'm really looking forward to showing you how to do auto restarting because it's my favorite part of Spring Boot. But until then, if you're getting the same results as me, then well done. You've got Spring Boot up and running at least, and we can clearly see that there's a lot of magic happening. But we're only seeing a very basic web page, so we'll take a break here, and when you come back, we'll start writing our first MVC controller.